Welcome to the Nightly News at 5.
Breaking news, the case of Gonzales versus Oregon, in which the Attorney General tried to overturn Oregon's Death of Dignity Act, has officially been decided by the U.S. Supreme Court. The vote was a 6-3 vote in favor of Oregon's law.
As she mentioned, they were trying to overturn the Death of Dignity Act. Well, what is that? It's a law that was passed in Oregon in 1994 that allowed a terminally ill patient to ask for a prescription that would allow them to end their life. It was also the first law of its kind, which is why it has caused such an uproar. But it was challenged in the late 90s as well.
Yes, it was challenged in 1997 by the Oregon Legislative Assembly, who sought to repeal it. Whether or not to repeal it was put to the ballots, and more people supported it the second time around than had supported it in the beginning. In fact, there was a jump of about 10% more people supporting it the second time around.
I guess we're all wondering, is there any kind of precedent for this case?
Well, there was the Terry Schiavo case not too long ago. In fact, it was about a year ago.
What was this case about?
This was a case in which Terry Schiavo, a woman who had been kept alive for years by feeding tubes, died because her husband decided that the tubes should be removed. Members of the House and President Bush tried to take action against this. This was the first time a right to die issue had come before the court.
Which is the same kind of issue that is being dealt with in the Gonzales versus Oregon case.
Exactly. In this case, the Supreme Court supported the right to die, and Terry Schiavo did die in the end because of the lack of feeding tubes. This sets a precedent for Gonzales because the court had already once supported the right to die. This also sets a precedent because it's an example of the judicial branch giving the power over medicinal practices to the states.
Well, why now? Why do you think it's happening now?
Well, I think it couldn't have occurred if the Republican Party and President Bush weren't so conservative and opposed to this idea of assisted suicide. If they weren't so against it, they might have left the issue alone, especially considering how controversial it is.
This could also be an issue of the baby boomers generation, who are the main voters nowadays, caring so much about the option to end their life if they are terminally ill. Because these people have such control over the polls, and this is such a big and imminent issue for them, it has gained more attention and momentum than it ever has before.
So everyone's been asking, so how did the Gonzales case even reach the Supreme Court?
It was challenged by the Attorney General, John Ashcroft, under the Bush administration in 2004. He lost in both the District and Ninth Circuit courts, who said that he lacked authority in this area and the power to regulate medicine like this should be left to the states.
Didn't by the time it finally reached the Supreme Court in October of 2005, Ashcroft stepped down and Alberto Gonzales stepped in to take over the case.
Yes, that did happen. So how did this Attorney General make his case?
Well, the basis for challenging the Oregon law was the Controlled Substances Act of 1970, or the CSA. He argued that the CSA, which regulates the flow of drugs, allowed the federal government to have power over the drugs in Oregon being used for assisted suicide.
The prosecution's argument was that the CSA, as I remember, says controlled substances under law must be prescribed and dispensed for legitimate medical purpose only, and if there was anything that could be considered an illegitimate purpose for these drugs, it would be the use of them to end a person's life. But Oregon had its own arguments too.
Yes, it did. The defense, led by Oregon's Attorney General, Robert Atkinson, argued that assisted suicide was a legitimate medical practice because it was relieving people of their pain.
The defense also said that Attorney General was not trying to prevent illegal drug trafficking as the CSA was originally intended, but instead to control how the drugs were used, which had previously been left to the states. But the real question is, how do the judges feel about these arguments?
I think that the Attorney General is stretching the law further than it is supposed to go. He does not have the authority to interpret the law the way he did. The CSA was created to prevent drug trafficking, not to give the federal government power to control assisted suicide and how the drugs are used. I sided with the states because in the past, medical practices have been left to the states. Also, this law has already been attempted to be repealed, and the people supported it more strongly than ever. I think that the Attorney General is simply trying to broaden and strengthen the meaning of the CSA to cover assisted suicide, and it is perfectly within his authority to do so. So what do people outside of the court think about this issue? We went out and interviewed some people who have some opinions on this issue.
I am now here with Diane Coleman, the founder of Not Dead Yet, an organization that speaks out for the disabled and handicapped. What is your opinion on the case of Gonzales versus Oregon and the issue of assisted suicide?
I think that is discriminating against those with disabilities.
I think assisted suicide goes against everything a doctor is. They're supposed to heal people. not kill them.
I am now talking to Catherine Tucker of Compassionate Choices, a nonprofit organization that educates others about the choices of when to die. What is your opinion on this?
I think that it is nice to have it there. It's not like anyone and everyone can and will take advantage of this law. It's only those who are in such pain that death is simply a better option.
Do you think that this law discriminates against the disabled in any way?
Absolutely not. I think this law is actually in favor of disability rights, because the point of those rights is to give the disabled control, and that is all this law is doing.
Thank you very much for your time.
Both sides presented valid arguments. So what does this all mean for our country? Was the decision the best for our country?
I think it was. Even if you just look at how this law started, the people of Oregon obviously wanted the law. Even after the attempt to repeal it in 1997, the Oregon people supported the law more strongly than ever. And is non-popular sovereignty one of the principles of the Constitution? If the people support it so strongly, the federal government should not completely disregard the will of its people.
I agree. I also think that this law is not hurting anybody and really only giving people comfort. Well, that's all the time we have for tonight. Thank you and good night.